Welcome to Underpinned with Dr. Tim Myers and Russ Harris. Join us as we open God's Word and dive in for a better understanding of the Scriptures and how they should be applied to everyday living. Welcome to Underpinned. This will be, I think, the last episode in our series about discipleship and
From Jesus's
what
perspective. Yeah.
Jesus talks about, and what he said to us about the Christian life, and what he showed us through example.
Uh-huh.
And we were going to wind it up last time, but we decided that we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the subject of giving. God talks about giving both to other people and also
Yeah.
giving back to Him. And so we're going to touch on that just a little bit
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
today's episode.
Yeah.
So I think Tim's going to start us off. Go
Yeah.
ahead and
All right.
let's jump in.
Yeah. There's three passages we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at Matthew 6, 1 through, well, let's see here. 1 through 5, 1 through 4.
Four, I think, yeah.
And that's in the middle of Sermon on the Mount. And then we'll turn it to Luke 6. I think it's 37 and 38.
I think
It's
so.
right in the middle. It's Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount.
I just,
And then we'll look at a short passage in Mark with the widow's mite, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It's interesting that giving is mentioned a lot in the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, but Jesus doesn't. I mean, I'm sure that we could pick out in other passages that Jesus referred to giving, but we're going to pick out on these three. But Paul is the one that really talks a lot about giving.
yes.
And so we're not going to go into Paul so much, but
Yeah. Might mention a verse or two as
verse
we
or
go,
two
but
as we go, if it,
if it comes up.
right, if it comes up. But anyway, this is what Jesus says about giving, that our motives are important
Yes.
in giving. It's not just doing the act, but the motives behind the act. And he says here in verse 1 of chapter 6, he says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them." In other words, he was really picking out the Pharisees because they would actually, hey, I'm giving, and make a big deal of it, how much they gave, or,
Didn't some of them even, like when they were praying and stuff, didn't
Mhm.
they all but stand up in the middle of an assembly or out on
Right,
the street and say, "Hey, look at me.
right,
Look at me. I'm fixing to pray,"
right,
or "I'm getting ready to give this," or the
right. Exactly right. And so Jesus is saying, don't do that because you're drawing attention not only to yourself,
right.
but the motive of giving is wrong. Your motive for giving is to help the person or give to God, not to draw attention to yourself.
And just to make it clear, that motive
Hmm.
is actually love for God and love for other people.
Right.
That
That should be
is
the
the
motive.
motive. That
Yeah.
should be our motive,
Yeah.
not to check off the box on the Christian to-do list,
Right.
or again,
Yeah.
like the Pharisees
Right.
were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he says, if you, in verse 2, he says, if you do, verse 1, last part of verse 1, sorry.
Mhm.
I'm having a tough time seeing anymore. That's terrible. Light has a tendency, I don't care what light it is, it glares in some ways. It's just hard for me to
You
read.
want us to dim them down just a little bit?
That doesn't help. I tried
Okay.
that in my office the other day and thought it would, to look at the computer screen
Yeah.
and didn't
No
help.
luck, huh?
Yeah, no luck.
Okay.
So anyway, bear with me here. But he says, if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. In other words, if you're doing it for yourself, not doing it for God and for others, God's not going to reward it.
Mhm.
To draw attention to yourself. And I really struggle for uh, like pews and other types of things, pianos and stuff donated to a church and they got somebody's name on it.
Right.
Uh, well, I mean, if it's a memory of somebody, that's a little different. But I mean, if I don't know, I struggle with that a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
because it says, okay, what is your motive really for giving?
Right.
You know, or even in the secular world, have certain venues and buildings named after such and such.
Mhm.
So
Well, and is that the question comes to my mind, you bringing that up?
yeah,
Is that another way that the church has made itself like the world? Because that's what we do in the world when we're raising money.
right,
We try to promise big donors. If you give, we will recognize you in some form or fashion,
right.
and that's what we're doing. That's what churches have
Hmm.
started to do. You pay buy this pew, and we'll
Yeah,
put your name on it,
yeah,
donated by or whatever.
yeah.
Is that maybe a secular attitude that we've brought into the church that doesn't belong.
I think so. I think that
I,
is very, very possible, probably very real. In verse 2, he says, "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets." Yeah. That's, in other words, don't draw attention to yourself and make it
hmm
really public,
Yeah.
as the hypocrites do. Oh, wow.
hmm
Again, we talked about that term hypocrite,
Yeah.
what it means. It's actor. It was the Greek actors who wore masks, so they
hmm
were pretending to be somebody that they weren't.
Right.
And so, in other words, when you're, doing righteous, quote unquote, righteous acts, and but yet you have no really love for God or love for people, you're being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
You know. So as as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others, truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. So in other words, if you're wanting recognition, you got it, but
Yeah.
not before God.
Right.
If you want to be recognized by people, fine.
hmm
But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What that's more of a metaphor, more of a figure of speech,
hmm
just being saying, just be private about it.
Yeah.
Don't draw attention to it,
hmm
so that that your giving may be in secret. So he kind of gave it away
Right.
what that probably is really meaning here. Then your Father who sees what you've done in secret will reward you.
Yes.
So so anyway, that's so our motives are really important when we
Right.
give. And Paul talks about it. I'm not going to go to the verses and so forth, but Paul says he loves a cheerful giver,
Yeah. I
and
I
that
jotted
God,
that verse
yeah.
down. 2 Corinthians 9
Mhm.
7.
And so when we give, we should be giving cheerfully. He
Yes.
also talks about not giving grudgingly.
hmm
In other words, if you feel like, oh, I don't know if I can really give this, and really Paul's recommendation is don't give.
Well,
If you can't do it cheerfully and with a good heart, then don't give if you have to give it grudgingly.
right. The
So,
NIV put
yeah.
that verse, 2 Corinthians 9 7.
Uh-huh.
Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give,
Yeah.
not reluctantly
Yeah.
or under compulsion, but for God loves a cheerful giver.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
exactly what you were
Yeah.
just describing.
Yeah. So anyway, that's so our motives are very, very important
Yeah,
when we give.
yeah,
And God looks more toward the heart than the amount.
right. Yes.
So yeah. So not that we shouldn't give, and we should, but
hmm
give what and he's well the other that verse that you read, Russ, I had the idea doing it ahead of time, or I can't remember exactly what
Yeah,
Paul said.
there were,
Well, you
it
actually
was,
referred to it. In other words, plan in your heart or something.
yeah,
What did it say?
yeah. Each of you should give what you've decided in your
In your
heart to
heart.
give.
Yeah, in other words, you should plan before you even go
Right.
to church or
hmm
whatever. To have a plan of giving,
Yeah. Well,
weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever. So
in the first letter to the
yeah,
Corinthians, he said in 1 Corinthians 16:2, he told them, Paul did, on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income,
yeah,
saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. So
yeah,
it's the same idea.
yeah.
It was for an offering to
Hmm.
be given. Plan it.
Yeah,
Plan it regularly.
right.
Plan it according to your income. Plan
Yeah,
it according to what you've decided in your heart to give. And to me, that's not talking about your emotions. That's
right.
talking about pray about it and whatever between you
Hmm.
and God, decide what you
Yeah,
should give
yeah,
and then give it cheerfully.
right, right.
Not, okay,
Yeah,
God, all again.
yeah, I'll give. I don't want to, but I'll give. Yeah. So, and I think when we do give, we got to realize, a lot of times people think, okay, we're giving to the church to keep the lights on, keep air conditioning running and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah.
like buying curriculum,
Right.
which is true. Those things are necessary,
Sure.
for a church to operate. But also think that, churches also give to missionaries,
hmm
have benevolence, to
Yes.
give to the poor or, homeless or
hmm
whatever. I mean,
Right.
churches do different things. So try to think beyond just the apparatus of the church.
Yeah. It's more than infrastructure.
Right. It's more, yes, it's more than infrastructure. Thinking of all the ministries that the church
Yeah.
is performing, that God can bless.
And as former and current staff people, I can
Uh,
assure you it does not all go to the staff members
No,
either.
no, it does not. Yeah, we can attest to that. Yeah, we don't go into the ministry to get rich,
Yeah.
or at least,
Sad.
well,
Someday,
some
I guess.
guys, I guess some have,
I
but
missed that calling.
me too, me
Yeah.
too. So yeah, it's not. That's not what we went into the ministry for. But
No.
so in other words, just test your motives when you
Yes.
give and try to plan ahead of time.
Hmm.
Therefore, you can give cheerfully if you
Right.
planned ahead of time according, like you said, according to your ability to give
Yeah.
and so forth.
Hmm.
The next passage is really very similar. It's in Luke 6, and it's actually in it's just a couple of verses that's kind of into about judging. If I can get to it, I talk and try to turn pages at the same time is a little hard. But anyway, um, yeah, it's actually beginning at verse 37.
Hmm.
It's actually, like I say, it's in the midst of judging, and this is Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
which is it's a little different than Matthew's.
Yeah.
And Pete, well, this is going to be one of those asides or one of those
Hmm.
going off the track a little bit. But a lot of scholars seem to think, well, how come this version is different from Luke and Matthew? Therefore, somebody's just making this up.
Right.
Well, if being in ministry, and you can attest to this, Russ, is that you can preach a same topic or passage in different churches, but it'll come out different.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening in Jesus'
Mhm.
ministry. He didn't just do the Sermon on the Mount once.
Right.
He probably did it in several different places,
Hmm.
and it changed as the need for the or
Sure.
according to the audience. I hope that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're a pastor and if you've preached in several churches, your message
Oh,
changes.
in addition,
Yeah.
we have yes, the entire Bible was inspired by the Holy
Right.
Spirit, but God used the personalities and minds of the
Right.
different authors. Matthew wrote his gospel to convince the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. That was his
Right.
primary purpose.
Right.
Luke was a physician, so you
Right.
can imagine the detail, the attention to
Hmm.
detail,
Right.
and his attention would have been focused on different details
Right.
than what Matthew would have been
Exactly.
bringing out. So you got different perspectives. Even
Hmm.
if it was a single time, you're
Right.
going to have
Yeah.
it's still the same message. It's
Right.
just from different
Yeah.
perspectives.
Yeah. It's just uh, packaged
It would
differently.
be like, well, it's like it has been as
Uh,
we've been through this podcast so far.
right.
We do a passage and you're leading and you bring
Mhm.
something out, but then the Spirit says something to me and I say something that you never thought of,
Right. I mean,
not
yeah.
because I'm brilliant, but
Yes.
because I have a different perspective.
Exactly. We all do. So yeah.
Mine's usually pretty simplistic,
Yeah.
but
Well, so,
that's
but yeah. So getting to this passage, verse 37, he says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give." And okay, here
here
it
we
comes.
go.
It says, "Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over with be poured out into your lap." So with the measure you use, it will be measured to you.
Mhm.
Now you can talk about judging in the same way. If you judge in a certain way, that people are going to talk about you the
Right.
same way.
And,
But
but also the
yeah,
flip side of that is
yeah,
true. If you give grace to people,
uh-huh,
then they are more likely to do the same for
right,
you when you have a problem.
right, exactly. Yeah, and the idea here about give and it will be given to you a good measure pressed down. I read this not too long ago, and I can't even tell you which commentator or
Yeah.
anything I read it from, but it gave me a new perspective on this little passage that when they went to get grain, like women and
Uh-huh.
so forth, they would go to the oh, what's the place called where you get the threshing floor,
Right.
where the
Yeah.
grain is? Yeah. So in other words, they had their part of their dress,
Hmm.
was long, and
Right.
they would kind of it would look like a little bag, more or less. And he says a good measure, pressed down, so you'd even put even more
Right.
in there, shaken together,
Mhm.
and running over.
Yeah,
And
a more modern visual of that might
it,
be a lady with a big apron on,
right,
and it's
yes.
maybe untied, and she picks that bottom part of the apron up and uses it like a basket
Oh,
or something.
that's a perfect example,
That,
and that's probably what the commentator I read is kind of referring to more
yeah,
or less. But yeah, so in other words, the person just overflows. As you give, that will be given back to you,
right.
and I shouldn't be. But here's a really kind of deal. That shouldn't really be the motive
I was
that we give,
I
just
was
to
about
give
to
something
say that.
back. You
God,
know,
tells us in several different places
yeah,
that if we give as He teaches us to,
uh-huh,
with the right motives and all,
right,
He will bless us for that.
yeah,
He's blessing us for obedience.
yeah,
It's not that we're trying to outgive God or anything.
right,
And I've heard it taught and preached a lot of times. Give, if you want to be blessed by God, give, give
yeah,
your tithe, give your
sacrificially,
whatever, give
yeah,
sacrificially. Well, I'm sorry, but if I if that's my reason for giving, so God will bless me, then I don't think I'm going to be blessed because my motives aren't right.
right,
I should be giving to God because He said so.
right,
He's worthy, and
right,
I love Him, and I want
right,
to show Him that
yes,
by giving my money and
right,
my time and my whatever,
right,
not because, oh, if I keep giving generously, He's going to bless me.
yeah,
No, that's not the reason right here. This
right,
is the result.
the result. And the other thing too, the way God blesses is not always financially.
Right?
I mean, it could be all kinds of other ways that He blesses
Yeah,
us, and it may not be even financial. There's a
yeah,
lot of poor Christians,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
Pick me.
Yeah,
Uh,
so yeah, I mean, so it's not always,
right.
measured in
No,
money in return.
no, certainly not.
Yeah. So
And that's never the intent.
no, it cannot
So
be.
again, it's the motive.
Yeah, yeah, it's the motive there.
Hmm.
Last passage we're going to be looking at, it's a really short one. It's in Mark. Oh, I
Mark
forget.
12,
Yeah, Mark 12. Yeah, I was just right
verse
to it.
41.
Verse 41. Yes. Okay.
And
Uh,
I had that, and I can flip
go
on up.
ahead. Yeah, right.
I had my marker in there one
Yeah.
because that was the
Yeah.
last one I
Yeah.
was looking at
Uh-huh.
earlier, and I found the same story
Uh-huh.
in Luke also, Luke
Oh,
21.
okay. All right.
Yeah, in Mark 12, the last four verses of chapter 12 in Mark, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Now, in the temple, as I understand it, there were multiple places to give,
Mm-hmm.
and some were for the temple tax.
Right.
There were several, three or four places for that, and then there were, as I read at this time, there were like four or five different places for free will offerings.
Oh, okay.
And this one
Yeah.
was probably in the court of women
Okay.
because they're observing a lady
Uh-huh.
here
Right.
giving.
Yes. Right.
But this would have been one of the free will offering
Uh-huh.
places, and he was sitting where they could see this
Mm-hmm.
box, and so obviously anybody that came up and gave an offering, they could see. So they were watching put money in the treasure. Many rich people threw in large amounts,
Mm-hmm.
but a poor widow came and put in two very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny.
Right.
Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they were giving, the rich were giving because they had plenty to live.
Right. For surplus.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it'd be, a
Yeah.
millionaire walks in and pulls a couple $100 bills out of his pocket and throws them in the offering plate in
Mm-hmm.
today's church.
Yeah.
Oh, ooh, wow, he gave,
Yeah.
yeah. And then this poor older lady on a fixed income got her Social Security check, came in and gave her last buck
Yeah.
out of there.
Yeah.
And Jesus says she gave more because she sacrificed.
Right.
And I mean, and there's really no difference when you read it in Luke 21, the
Uh-huh. It's pretty
first
much.
four verses.
Uh-huh.
As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in two very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said, this poor widow's put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on.
Wow. I just
That can,
that's faith
because
too,
I
you
mean,
know?
and
Wow.
it almost sounds contradictory to other things because we're
Mhm.
taught in the Bible to be good steward of what
Right.
God gives us as far as money
Uh-huh.
and possessions and whatnot, take good care of those things and all of that. And yet, then here we're taught to give sacrificially, and Jesus is putting in high esteem this
Hmm.
widow who
Yeah.
gave what she had to live on. I don't know that that means that she gave up her grocery money
Yeah.
or her rent money or
Yeah.
anything, but it doesn't say that. But whatever she had, that's
Hmm.
what she gave. But she trusted God to supply,
Right.
and there's the rest
Yeah.
of the lesson for us
It
in this
is.
example
Right.
is that He promised. Go
He,
back to the Sermon on the Mount. Even He
right.
talks about. trust, have faith.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
he clothes even the flowers and the
Right. Right.
birds of the air. So isn't
Yeah.
he gonna? Can't we trust him to give us what we need?
Hmm.
You know, don't worry about tomorrow, kind of thing. And she epitomized that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but I mean, what an example
Oh,
for
I
us to
know.
give.
Yeah.
How many times have I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just me. But have you ever been in the place where it was time to write your tithe check to the church and give your money back to God, and you were like, oh man, I've got this bill I haven't paid yet, and this bill, and I
Hmm.
need to buy tires for the car, but I'm supposed to write, you
Uh-huh.
know,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's a struggle
It is.
to have that faith
Right.
where deep down we know God's going to take care of us,
Hmm.
but sometimes we get wrapped up in the fear
Right.
and
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
instill living by faith.
Uh-huh.
But it's all about the motive, because we talked about the motive in the other two passages, and then we
Right.
see this lady. She didn't give sacrificially because she wanted to be seen by the Pharisees.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Only Jesus is the only one that recognized it.
Yeah, she gave
Yeah.
sacrificially because she loved God.
Yeah. Right.
And that was her motive.
That's the whole key. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, short passages, but we thought we ought to. It is a part of being a
it
disciple,
is.
and is being able to give. And like I say, our motives really count. There
Mhm.
are times I don't know that the widow sacrificially gave all the time.
Right.
This could have been a one-time event, but there are times I think that God does call us
Oh yeah.
to go,
Yes.
show faith
Right.
and give to whatever cause or church or
Uh-huh.
whatever you think that God is leading you to do. And
Yeah.
there are times to do that. And but on the other passages that you read, Russ, plan ahead of time,
Right.
do it cheerfully,
Hmm.
and what was the other thing you said?
Um,
Um,
well, I mean, it was said,
yeah,
like we said,
not
plan
grudgingly.
not
Yeah, yeah,
reluctantly, not
reluctantly. Yeah,
grudgingly, all of that.
yeah,
'Cause God even set that up back in the Old Testament
right,
law,
exactly.
um,
Yeah.
which is where we get the idea of a tithe
Hmm.
initially.
Right.
Um, honor, let's say, I forget, I don't even think I jotted down that one. But there, he actually, let's see, tell the Israelites to bring me an offering in Exodus 25:2. You're to
Uh-huh.
receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. But then, oh yeah, it was in Leviticus when he actually
Hmm.
talked about the tithe. 27:30, a tithe of everything from the land, whether the grain or the soil or the fruit from the trees belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. But then on some of those laws about sacrifices and stuff,
Uh-huh.
he took into account people's income.
Right.
Because for the same sin,
Hmm.
some people might have to do like a ram, somebody else
Yeah.
might be able to do a couple of turtle doves
Right.
for the
Right.
same sin,
Right.
atonement, because that's all they could afford.
Right.
And
Right.
God wanted to make sure
Hmm.
that it was attainable for
Uh-huh.
everyone.
Yeah.
Kind of like with Jesus, huh?
Yeah.
He wanted
Yeah.
to make sure it was attainable for everybody,
Yeah.
whosoever will may come.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for
Beautiful.
salvation. Yeah, for salvation.
Yeah.
So, anyway, folks, I hope this, like I say, if we got into Paul, we could go
Mhm.
into more
Yes,
about
yes.
giving, or if we went back to the Old Testament, which Russ, you alluded to
Touched
a
on,
little,
yeah,
touched on a little bit. I mean, there's a lot about giving, but we thought that these three passages would be enough,
yeah.
and just test your motives when you do give.
Right.
Yeah,
And we wanted to throw this in because we've
yeah,
talked about all of these things
right,
that have to do with the Christian life,
yeah,
and where all of them are giving in some way. And
right,
they should all be our
yes,
motive because we love the Lord and
right.
He loved us. So we give of our time to read and to study the Bible.
Hmm.
We give of our time and effort to share the gospel.
Right. Yeah.
And but the one thing that many preachers avoid preaching on at church is
Right.
tithes and offerings,
Right.
giving,
Hmm.
because it makes people mad. It
Right.
makes people upset. Or you have preachers who will avoid it at all costs
Right.
until there's a budget deficit at church, and then we're going to hit it hard for a
Yeah.
couple of weeks.
That's
And,
right.
I mean, we need to not skip it
No.
because it might offend somebody. There's
Mm.
lots of stuff in the word that offends
Oh
people.
gosh. Yes. Yeah.
That's
Right.
it's completely contrary to our sinful nature, so it's
Right.
going to offend.
Uh-huh.
And Jesus said he came to be a stumbling block and an offense.
Right.
I think if we're going to follow in his footsteps, that's part of it.
Yeah.
But we needed, we didn't feel like anything talking about the Christian life would be complete if we
Right.
didn't actually touch on actual giving of our
Right.
time and our money
Right.
to God.
Right.
We hope that this whole series has been an encouragement to you,
Yes.
maybe clarified some things, and pushed you on your journey a little
Hmm.
bit, and
Yeah.
on your growth. If you have questions, again, you can always reach us at questions@underpinministry.com.
Hmm.
Any of our videos on YouTube, always on our Facebook
Yeah.
page, you can send messages, write comments under any of those. We will try to keep looking back and checking those. But keep coming back, stay with us. We are going to continue on, I think,
Yeah.
next after this series. We've been kind of we talked about the topic
Right.
of praising God in the hard times. We've talked about this idea of discipleship. So
Discipleship.
next, we're going to just dive into the Word, which is the whole basis of our underpinned ministry, is
Uh-huh.
being underpinned by the Word. We're going to dive in, and I believe we've just recently decided we're
Yeah.
going to jump into the book of James.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it deals with a lot
A
this
lot of
practical
practical,
discipleship. Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
join with us next time, and we're going to start into our dive into the book of James.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks for joining us today on Underpinned. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends. Join us again next week as we continue diving into God's Word. Until then, you can find us at www.underpinnedministry.com and at Underpinned Ministry on Facebook. For questions or comments, you can reach us at questions@underpinnedministry.com. And thanks again for listening.